Hi, everyone. Welcome to Let's Talk About Skills, baby. I am your host, Kelly Ryan Bailey. Each week, I chat with inspiring visionaries about the skills that make them successful, how they developed those skills, and their innovative approaches to improving skills-based hiring and learning around the world. Come learn what skills help you live your best life. This week, we're joined by Sebastien Turbot. Thank you so much for joining us, Sebastien.
Hello, and thanks you for having me.
Such a pleasure. So let me give a little quick background. Sebastien is the CEO and Chief Strategist of Eco6, which is EKO6, a Canadian-based consultancy that guides governments, cities, businesses, and civil society in creating engaging platforms that turn ideas into action. Sebastien is currently a research fellow at WISE, which is the World Innovation Summit for, did I say that wrong? World Innovation Summit for Education. And developing a living lab on learning ecosystems and cities. The lab will seek to build a global community of practice and to support urban ecosystems in designing, testing, and prototyping learning ecosystems. Sebastien's work on designing creative learning and living ecosystems that help communities develop the knowledge, skills, and talents they need to address the evolving needs and complexities of current and future societies. Sebastien, I know I got to mention sort of these highlights, but I'd love to hear a little bit more about what led you into this work.
Well, I mean, it's been an interesting and long journey, I would say. It actually started off when I was working back in 2001 in Afghanistan. Mm-hmm. Interesting place and country, and where I was working, in the humanitarian and development field on what's called in the jargon as behavior change communication, public information, social marketing. What it is basically is using mass media, traditional media to promote key messaging, key learnings, education on key topics such as education and how to vote, how to have basic hygiene practices, mm-hmm. the importance of sending your girls to schools or on human rights. And this is really where I discovered that in a country where there was no formal education sector, that you could really leverage other means of learning and education. That led me then to work with TEDx Paris, the mm-hmm. TED version in Paris, and realizing that there was this thirst actually around the world for new forms of learning, which then led me to a first stunt at WISE, the World Innovation Summit for Education, where I was the kind of global editor-in-chief, a deep dive into the future of education conversation, around edtech, the future of teaching, are your universities still worth it? Are diplomas still worth it? Lots of really fascinating questions.
Yeah.
And then I moved on to leading a foundation here in Montreal called the New Cities Foundation. So this was more of a focus on the future of cities, how do we make cities more resilient, more livable, happier cities, looking at the future of mobility and autonomous vehicles and e-scooters. But, in this shift between education and cities, I realized that in the cities conversation, in the cities world, there wasn't that much talk about learning and education. And as a mirror to that, realizing that in the education world, there wasn't that much talk about, how cities were evolving and the challenges that some of these city leaders were facing. And this is where I really wanted to start to explore where these two topics met and what was happening, if anything, there.
That makes sense. Well, let's go back to the beginning here for a moment. I hope you don't mind. I have a couple of questions. So in your time in Afghanistan, when you were talking about sort of alternative forms of education, what at that point in time, I don't know what year it might have been, but what was sort of coming up as other alternatives besides the traditional?
So this was out of formal school education. Then we would use some traditional tools. We use radio and TV. There was no internet back then, but mostly, radio and TV and billboards. But we were also really trying to tap into more traditional forms of communication and hence of learning. So, we did lots of programs around theater, around poetry, and stuff like that. And, developing, weaving these messages and these learnings, and this knowledge into traditional forms of media to be able to help. I don't like educate, but to help the educational outcomes or the knowledge that Afghans could build on.
Yeah, it's almost like finding a fun way to share information. When I think of, the theater style or poetry, it's like, how else can we share these messages without it being, maybe they might not take it directly as education, would be my guess on trying to find some of those other forms. Was it successful?
To an extent, yes. It's a fascinating and complicated country. Basic levels of education knowledge were really low, so it was challenging. But I think then on a few issues like education, women's rights, road safety, basic hygiene practices like the importance of washing your hands and stuff like that.
Right.
I think we did a pretty good job.
That's really neat. And so at this point in time, when you started to get into this, what did you start to create a passion around, wow, did this have more meaning for you in your life just beyond work as well?
Well, yes. It's a life-changing experience, for sure. For me, it really helped me understand that what I was good at and what I liked to do was to take complicated topics and simplify them, but in a good way, as in making them more accessible to people who were less familiar, who might think, no, this topic, this is too complicated, I'll never really get it. I'm really trying to help simplify and make these messages or these key topics more accessible. I have fond memories of working for the United Nations on these topics like human rights, and they come to me saying, okay, here are all the reports you need to read to be able to and this is the information we want to share. Me having to tell them, but we have a 30-second radio spot, and it's going to be targeting rural illiterate women. We're going to have to do, we're going to have to do something to take this down to 30 seconds and make it entertaining, but still quality in terms of the messaging.
It sounds like, there are a ton of, that sort of skill set. Number one, just the love and the passion around solving complex problems, number one, but then also the ability to sort of distill that information, getting down to the various levels of communication, because of course, all of the different audiences that you were talking with, empathy, my goodness, like the list goes on at what really is this magical skill set for someone in your position, but that passion that you bring into it as well is just, it's sort of that magic that everyone looks for when they're trying to find, like, what do I want to do in my life? I love this. And now, as it turns out, I have all these positive attributes that make me do that quite well.
Well, actually, I would add one, because I was thinking about this, preparing for this show, is one skill that I've realized I practiced and honed was listening, kind of empathy and listening, in the sense of, you rarely have the opportunity in your life to find yourself in a culture, in a society where you have no codes whatsoever. You're really starting from scratch. And so, you find yourselves walking into these social situations, these social gatherings where you have, no codes. So you have to listen, you have to open your heart, open your eyes, to be able to understand what you need to do, not to do, how things work. And I think this has really carried me throughout my career, in the sense of, yes, I'll tag myself as an expert or a generalist, but I don't like to be like the kind of consultancy type coming in and saying, I already know the answer to your problem without having even really listened to you. And this is something I think, especially to a younger audience, find your opportunity to take a deep dive into a place where you're lost. All your social references are gone.
No, I'm so glad you honed in on that as well, because quite often I think I hardly ever talk with anyone about listening as a skill, but it's such an important skill. And I feel like, especially when you're getting into topics, it's really just, for me right now, I'm working on a project, an Equity Cities project in South Carolina, the state of South Carolina in the US. And it's just fascinating, because you're exactly right. what I thought was going to be the scenario that was happening once you started, having conversations with people and hearing what was truly going on. It totally changed the frame of that. And this for me is like extremely close in connection, not only because of the listening, but also because it's very similar to the work that you're describing. Mm-hmm. So let's come back forward here for a moment, because I am really curious to hear now, we have an idea of where your passion lies in this area, which is wonderful. We understand a good bit about the skills that are really making you successful, but I want to dive into the work aspect of this a little bit more, because this is just such a fascinating concept. You're right. Most people don't consider regional context and education in the same discussion. So was that something that you thought, wow, I've been doing these projects and I want to see what happens when we talk about, what really led you to think, wow, these are conversations that should be in line?
Well, as I was saying, the kind of education sector was or is still going through its own revolution, of reinventing education, moving away from like an industrial model education to or 21st century model education. There's this quote I like, says, we have 21st century students with 20th century teachers, a 19th century curriculum, and an 18th century school calendar, and so how do we move away from that, making sure that learning and education is less siloed, more connected to the real world and to place, about really about lifelong learning, about learner agency, more personalized, and really about learning to learn. So you have this whole shift happening in the education world. On the city side, it was really about competition, growing competition between cities, especially because when we talk cities, we often think New York, Los Angeles, Paris, these mega cities, but they're good, they should be fine. But I'm thinking more second tier cities who have more to gain and more to lose, right, with all these shifts happening right now in the world. So they're competing for talent, to attract and retain talent. They're competing to attract businesses and investment. They're competing to ensure that they're future proof. They're anticipating that they may lose lots of jobs because of automation or whatnot, but they also want to make sure that their population, their residents are ready for these future jobs that we don't even know we don't even know what these jobs are going to be. So basically, cities realizing that skills is their business, and this was kind of new for cities. They hadn't really seen skills as something they should focus on, but realizing, and the COVID crisis in a way is really helping them that skills and learning are intrinsically linked to their resiliency strategies, and making these cities more adaptive, and making these cities more flexible, being able to bend and not break. Right. So increasing pressure on cities to participate, lead, support the skilling, the reskilling, the upskilling of their residents and citizens. And so the questions we asked, to get back to your question, was, couldn't we be doing more? Aren't there ways to better maximize learning at the city space, to complement, I'll insist on this, to complement formal education systems and maximize learning at the city level? And on this, I guess, a quote and a statistic, there's nothing new here in a way. I was looking into this. The Greek philosopher Plutarch was saying that, is the city the best teacher? So the Greeks were already asking this question. So in a way, nothing new. Yeah. And the data point I like to give to people is, actually, question to you, Kelly. Sure. What's the percentage of time students spend, the percentage of their waking hours that students spend in school?
Wow, I don't know. I feel like it's got to be 75%, no?
20%.
20%?
Students only spend 20% of their waking time in school. So this is where, once again, is there not an opportunity, something to tap into, to provide more new learning opportunities, as in playgrounds, it's bus stations, right, when they're doing their groceries, just to give kind of a very concrete example. So basically, my take and our take revise is, how can we tap into that potential? People are, as we speak, so better understanding who's doing what, understanding what works and what doesn't, and be able to leverage, scale that, and support those who would want to look into this question of learning ecosystems and learning cities, and help design the toolbox for them to take this task on.
Yeah, no, it's just such a prevalent, I mean, now the first question that I have when I hear this is, are there any specific cities that you're focusing in on? That's not question number one. Question number two on the same thread, is this like a global thought process when you talk about cities? And the third is, why cities when we talk about a region? Why not, again, in the US, why not county, MSA, state, right? But there's all various versions of that globally. Why city?
Okay, so your first question was?
Yep. So the first question was any specific cities?
Oh, yes. So, well, the Living Lab I'm working on with WISE is a global initiative. WISE is very global. So we're looking at potentially all places, all territories, right, all cities. We do, WISE is based in Qatar, in the Middle East, in the GCC, and we do hope to take most of these learnings to Doha, the capital city, to help them become a learning city. So there's that. But I guess to your answer is, what are the kind of cities that are emerging on this map of learning ecosystems and learning cities? Truth be said, it's mostly Western, I'd say even, Anglo-Saxon cities. So a lot in the UK, a lot in the US. UK, I can mention, Manchester, Bristol, Liverpool, Plymouth. In the US, one city that really stands out is Chicago on that. But otherwise, cities like Medellin, Nairobi, Singapore is in its own way, are really trying to, a lot of Korean cities are trying to build on this idea.
Interesting. And then I think my second question, so you answered my second question in that as well, which was globally. And then, and then the third was why cities as well.
Well, one is to say that, as we speak, over half the population of the world lives in cities. And this is just, anticipated to rise to 60-70% in 20 years from now. So there's this reality of the world is now an urban world, and will stay so. So there's that. Plus, I mean, there is this momentum as we speak in the cities conversation around, the past 5-10 years. It's really, amazing kind of energy and momentum around projects around civic participation, collaboration at the city level. So there's also this kind of practical aspect, at least for us, of trying to tap into this emerging but very thriving kind of urban innovation conversation, to use that as a kind of backbone, if you want, to this thinking around learning ecosystems. So it's not to say that what we're talking about isn't applicable to the suburbs or to rural areas. It definitely is, but indeed wanting to start in the city space first, at least. Okay.
And then my other, there's so many questions that I have around this, but I just love this. Like, I almost want to hear, I kind of want to dive deep and just hear how you go through this process, but before we jump in there, are you seeing a lot of commonality of solutions like these ecosystems that could work broadly? Like what you learn in one location could easily be, does it have to be a lot adjusted or slight adjustments? How much overlap are you seeing in what you learn?
I'd say there's a lot of overlap, at least in the sense that you often find yourself with the same issues and challenges in terms of developing and implementing these types of ecosystems. It's a lot around questions of trust between these different actors, looking at what type of collaboration models, looking at leadership, governance, questions around what type of pedagogies, what type of learning to people practically would be happening. So I think there is a lot of overlap in terms of the issues and the challenges they share that, of course, we need to contextualize because, hey, just to give you an obvious one, there's like a clear divide between cities or places where education, who as we speak is officially kind of legally responsible for the education mandate? Is it the cities? Is it the region, the states, the national government?
Right.
So depending on, typically I'm from France. It's education is still in the national mandate. So so there's that of how can you link what you want to do at the city, and having to convince your prime minister, your minister of education, before you can actually do anything. In other countries like the US, there is more flexibility, and the responsibility of education is more like down to the ground. So there's questions like this, of course, contextually, but mostly it's shared challenges. So I see the potential and the opportunity to replicate and scale.
Yeah, no, that's fascinating. Is there a city, or maybe multiple cities, that you would say they've just cracked the code and are doing it really well?
Well, for me, like the best examples of learning ecosystems, true learning ecosystems. I'm sorry, there's a bit of noise. It's snowed in Montreal, so they're breaking the snow away. Two cities that I've already mentioned, I'd say, Plymouth, Bristol, and Chicago, where they've implemented what I think is recognized by this small community as like a really good example. So in the UK, it's called the Cities of Learning Project. In the US, it's called LRNG. I don't know if you're familiar with this. With
I am, yeah, and with Cities of Learning. So this is so fascinating. Yep.
Well, there you go. But to explain to your audience, and actually I'll put on my user experience hat.
Yes, I would love it. Thank you.
Yeah. So let's say you're 2022, and you have a passion for a topic, and you want to actually go to work in this field, but for whatever reasons, there's no formal educational offer, or you don't have the time for it. Basically, what these two programs do is they've created this app where they've talked to employers and say, okay, what are the skills you need? Okay, and really list them. Then they went out and looked in communities and neighborhoods. What are the offers available linked to these skills? It might be a hackathon, it might be a workshop, might be an exhibition, it might be mentoring projects, internship projects, whatever. So they have this whole database, and then you as the user, you download the app because it's app based, and you say, okay, I want to develop this skill, and this skill. Okay, and then it comes up with a playlist. They actually call it a playlist, and you choose what you want to do. So you build. There's really this notion of learner agency, which is really important. Learner agency, not necessarily being exactly personalized learning. We could get back to that in a second.
Sure.
So basically, you have your app, and so I want to get from here to here in aeronautics or whatever skill. Okay, I'm going to do this, and this is my own learning pathway. And if we're to do it together, you might choose another pathway. But basically, putting the learner in the driver's seat of his or her own learning, and be able to say, okay, I'm more of a, I like to hack stuff, so I'll go to the hackathons. I'm more of a listener, so I'll go to the conferences and the TED Talks.
Sure, you get to pick what works for you.
Yeah, exactly, and to develop these skills. So yeah, for me, it's interesting because the city's involved, employers are involved, the wider community is involved. There's this notion of learner agency. We can get to that maybe a bit later. This whole question of also how do you assess the learning? How do you recognize these skills and stuff like that? Such a huge question right now. Yeah, so there's a lot bundled in these two projects.
Yeah. No, I mean, it's up to you on if you want to shift gears to another topic, but I'm also happy to dive in here because I think our audience, the thing is, globally speaking right now, but the audience of this podcast tends to be slightly more geared towards, surprisingly enough, UK, Canada, US. And the hot topic, right, is what you're talking about right now, especially because of the high unemployment numbers, let alone, just sort of like everyday life, and also migration, right? Because there's this migration out of cities happening. I agree with you. I don't necessarily believe that that's going to be, a long-term thing, but where everyone's sort of adjusting to some things that COVID has slightly moved around, right? So yeah, I would love to jump in a little bit deeper if you don't mind, kind of the process of what you're when you think of this work, kind of, do you mind just like walking through how you might assess what's going on in a particular city and what might be the solution that helps them?
Well, actually, I'm going to stop here, Kelly, for a second. I'm
Sure.
not sure I get I'm not sure I get your question. Sorry.
No, that's okay. I was thinking, well, I'm just really curious if you have methods of like, okay, if we're going to start working with another city, do you have like I'm trying to think of, are there partners in place? How do you provide services through your organization? Is that what you're doing? Are you like going in on the ground and like starting a project? Yeah.
Okay. Got it.
Yeah.
So you want to start again?
Yep. Go for it. So, Sebastien, what I would love to ask is, does your organization provide services to sort of help understand if there was another region that was interested or, needed this type of assistance? I think I'm just curious, like, do you go in and sort of help understand what's going on in their region and provide assistance? How does this work from your end?
Well, yes, definitely. Echo 6, we support city leaders or sometimes organizations. Yeah, because it can come from cities, it can come from sometimes from the employers, sometimes from the local, like the Chamber of Commerce, sometimes from civil society. But so, yes, support them in better understanding the potential of learning ecosystems, and then helping them kind of, hack or, help them, design, test, develop, and prototype these learning ecosystems. What's also interesting is that you have a whole set of like this whole ecosystem of organizations looking at help communities work on learning ecosystems. Typically, to give you an example, it's an organization called NetEDU based in Barcelona, but it's a global network. They've prepared what I think is really interesting is this kind of self-assessment tools for schools who would want to look at learning ecosystems. So basically, it's kind of like a Q&A to be able to measure how ready or not you may be to move into more of an ecosystemic learning approach. There's people like the Weaving Lab based out of the UK. They're looking at, helping school leaders and teachers. They're almost like they go down a level. Same thing, support them as they embark on their own journey into learning ecosystems. So we do it, but there's a whole network of people doing it, and but all this is actually quite in the making. This NetEDU tool, almost it's in its pilot phase.
Wow.
It would seem quite obvious, but no, it's only now that people are really looking into how to support communities in approaching this question.
Yeah, and I mean, and it's not surprising, right? It's fascinating, really, how skills, when you think of it from a regional perspective, just really, although I think there was some sort of like underlying current of conversation happening, it really just came into everyone's mind's eye really quickly last year when this all kicked off. So not that it hasn't been there, but I'm not surprised that all the solutions haven't existed. And it's just really great that you're getting into this. I'm especially really interested in this, and I think the audience is going to be as well. So tell me, like, what else are you up to? Is it all cities, or is there other stuff too?
Well, can I add something actually before we go into that?
Yes, of course.
Is to say, lots of these learning ecosystems are about the skills gap, because this is a skills show. I didn't want to mention that. I'd say, maybe 70 to 80% of these learning ecosystems are focusing at the local level on skills gap. But even when they're not focusing on the skills gap, when it's maybe more looking at, helping the city reach its SDG goals, or looking at social cohesion or sustainability, for example, skills are still front and center of the conversation, because these more, this link between formal and informal really encourages skills-based learning approach, if you want. So it's hard skills, soft skills, social emotional skills, it's collaboration, communication, creativity, problem solving, empathy, foresight, adaptability. So skills are really front and center of this learning ecosystems conversation. This is where it's different from personalized learning, where it's not just how can I better access knowledge, but it's also how do I leverage the fact that I'm traveling my city to be able to develop skills. So it's not just about learning more, it's about learning better and honing new skills.
And actually, you had touched on this earlier about sort of these assessment of skills,
Yes.
right? Because I think that's a slight difference when we talk about formal education versus other, is a lot of people say, I mean, granted, let's not get into that there are arguments over the formal educational assessments. Let's not go there. But I would love to hear a little bit about how you're approaching and thinking of assessing when we're talking about skills and sort of alternative learning opportunities.
Well, I mean, as in the whole conversation around assessing skills, there's indeed, how do you assess something that's so intangible? You can't really test for a skill. You can't test for creativity. So indeed, there's a lot of thinking around looking at, more kind of peer-based assessments, where it's less the test, it's less, Q&A, but more about peer-based recognition of your mastery of a given skill. You don't expect children to pass test in violin playing, and you trust the teacher in assessing that. So there's just that conversation. But where it's really interesting for me is more on less than on the assessment, it's the recognition of these skills. And this is where there's a whole conversation around digital badges. So I don't know how familiar your audience is, but for those who aren't, two things here. Remember when we were all Boy Scouts and Girl Scouts, and you would learn to make a fire, and you would get the little flamey thing. I know how to make a fire. If you knew how to use the first aid kit, same thing. So it's kind of the similar vein. The more contemporary version is LinkedIn and the skills endorsements.
Right.
We don't use it that much. We don't. I mean, if you ask me, we don't leverage it well. But this idea of, aside from your diploma, aside from your job titles, if on any given skill, Kelly, you've had 300 people endorse you for that specific skill, does it not send a message that you actually master the skill? So anyway, there's this whole thing around digital badges and recognizing these skills. So if I go back to my example, employers have said we want them to have this skill. They've looked at the learning opportunities, and they said, okay, you need, if you do 3 or 4 or 5 or 6, you get the level where the system, the platform, the ecosystem will recognize that you've reached that skill. Yeah. So this is really a lot of the same thinking going around in terms of assessing and recognizing the honing of these skills within these learning ecosystems.
Yeah. Do you find, I mean, I think it's a great point with the badging. Are you finding that employers, I think of, when I think of the ecosystem, right, I think of someone, a person involved in learning, but it always ends up leading to employment in some way. So, are you finding that employers are really able to acknowledge that, yes, we agree that this badge means you have this, or are you finding that there needs to be some sort of communication happening for that structure to be in place?
Well, actually, it links back to the question around why this focus may be on cities, or at least on a specific place. By this, I mean that in examples I gave you and what we work on is we onboard the employers from the start in the sense of they said, okay, here are the skills we need. They've been presented the kind of these possible pathways. They've I'm going to say agreed to them, but they've recognized that, yes, okay, if someone were to do this, 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 and this, and if this person comes with a badge, yes, I will recognize.
So agreed up front.
So they've agreed. So, but this is where, maybe the downside is, it's within that community in the sense of, as we speak, I don't think these badges are really transferable. In the sense of, if I participate in a program in Chicago and I have my whatever skill, and if I go to LA and look for a job and I say, oh, but wait, no, I got this badge when I was in Chicago. Yeah, unfortunately, as we speak, I'm not sure an employer back in LA would say, yeah, but I've never, I don't know what this is. But at least at the local level, trying to solve the skills gap locally, employers on board and are ready to recognize these badges as valid demonstration of the mastery of a skill.
I wonder, and you may already have been thinking this through, I wonder, as our world is naturally turning more virtual, and, people may not necessarily be in the same location that they work, how much that will start to be like another challenge that we need to address and sort of sort out?
Well, generally speaking, on the kind of, learning ecosystems and technology, first of all, I like to say something, ed tech will only make a bad education worse. So, it's not necessarily the silver bullet. Technology is at the heart of most of these learning ecosystems, but more as the infrastructure, the platform, the backbone.
Right.
But then kind of, I would say learning ecosystems are agnostic in terms of technology, in the sense of, it's more about how do you want to learn, and when do you want to learn?
Right.
Is it about, mentorship, internship, once again, participating in activities like hackathons, or is it going to conferences? So once we've said that, once you, Kelly, have said, this is what I want to do, if you can do it physically, so much the better. If you want to do it remotely and digitally,
Right.
fine. It doesn't really change. So I tend to define a kind of tech agnostic version of learning ecosystems.
Okay.
Once again, aside from the backbone, the platform that connects all these actors and all these ideas and learning opportunities.
Yeah. And, we talked a lot about sort of just skills in general, but I wonder when I talk about life skills, I think immediately about you describing this technology as the backbone, but all the people that are interacting with this technology, let alone the learners, right? But like all the other people that are interacting with this, be it if it's an employer, so on and so forth, however much they agreed, is there a training that has to happen? I'm just like thinking of ongoing sort of like skill training because this is not, they may not be familiar with this process or how to understand when they see this, that it means that. Is there a lot of that, more of like change management, I would say maybe instead of training, that happens from the people utilizing these systems?
So on the learner side, it's quite intuitive,
Right.
especially with young learners. It's okay. Indeed, it's more of a challenge when you're talking to kind of more traditional industry business
Right.
leaders. When you're talking to sometimes, with teachers, they are less attuned to this. But I think it's changing, and I it's one of the challenges, but it's still not top of lists for me.
I'm actually like thankful to hear that. That's always nice to know that people are open to these adjustments, because sometimes change is hard.
No, where change is hard is back to what I was saying. It's more like the collaboration level, the trust
Right.
issue.
Right.
Where educators can be, and rightly so, kind of
We're not sure. Okay. Yep.
But wanting to keep the business world at large, and with business leaders saying, but why should I be part of this? I'm paying my taxes. It's up to the formal education sector, to provide me with the skilled workers I need. So yeah, the change management issue is less on the tech. It's more on the soft stuff.
On the soft stuff.
Trust. Yeah, on trust and collaboration.
Yeah, I think we have all at some point been in conversations on either side of that equation, because I just laughed. I couldn't help but laugh when you said that out loud. So tell us, Sebastien, I know we're starting to get close to the end of our time, but I'd love to know, what else you are working on, because it's just, I love this topic, and I'm sure there's other innovation points as well.
Specifically within the learning ecosystems part and WISE, or generally speaking?
That's up to you. If you want to dig in there with more of the WISE stuff, that's fine. Otherwise, you can talk about other things you might be interested in.
Well, one thing I'm currently working on a lot as well, but it is linked, you'll see, is really looking at how we can, especially in the business sector, how can we better leverage conferences, events, mega events like, Olympic Games or World Cups, and turning these into also learning opportunities, where, most people in the world see conferences as you have these 2,000 people coming into a city. They're locked into the hotel ballroom and the hotel restaurants and their bedrooms, and then they kind of come and go. But whatever topic was at the heart of their conversation, the future of transport, the future of business, future of marketing, future of learning, whatever, does not impact the local community on this specific topic. So it's looking at how to bring out more learning for local communities around these big events and these big conferences. Especially that, they're all on hold as we speak now.
Yeah.
They are going to come back. People might not want them back. So we're trying to help the cities hosting these events and the organizers of these events develop a thinking and processes around local social impact to be able to say to the host communities, look, you need to perceive these conferences as positive for you, and not just from a tax point of view, right, or people buying souvenirs in the souvenir shops, but also that if there's a conference coming in on sustainability, it will help. Well, it will participate in improving the sustainability of our city. So it's still learning at the city level, but more from the kind of event side.
I actually really like that. In my mind, it's sort of like I started automatically thinking of other ways that you could integrate. I'm sure all of us have been involved in a conference where you go to a location for, a period of 2 days in which you never step outside because you're just in that like hotel and conference center, doing the things that you do. But imagine if it was more integrated into that particular city. I often say, like, I would love to have visited the city that I just got to go to for this conference, but there may be ways to incorporate, what's going on. It just got my mind going. So that is really fascinating. I'd love to hear more about that as it progresses.
Yeah.
Very cool. Well, Sebastien, I'd love to give you a moment here. And if there's anything else you'd like to share with our audience about either your work or something else you're interested in, I give you the open mic.
A last point, which I wanted to mention earlier, is the difference between, because often people come to me saying, oh, so this is about personalized learning. For me, personalized learning has kind of been taken over by the tech conversation. It's, okay, how do we develop software and algorithms that can push content to me depending on how the software assesses my level in any given topic. Learner agency for me is really important, and is really at the heart of this thinking around learning ecosystems. And I know I'm saying this because I know it can feel fluffy to most people when we talk about learner agency, but it's really, how can we design systems where the learners are really in the driver's seat of their own learning, that they choose what they want to learn, when they want to learn, how they want to learn it. And so really empower them in their own learning pathway. So it's not just having the right pushed content to me, but really about getting learners. And when I'm saying this, it's learners of all ages. It's not just students, but really, yeah. How do we put learners in the driver's seat of their own learning? I know it's been talked about for a long time, but I think with projects and processes like learning cities and learning ecosystems, we may just be able to crack this kind of wicked problem.
I'm so glad you pointed that out. I do not think it's fluffy at all in this conversation because, a lot of the times that description you gave earlier about that backbone, it's sort of like this, the data and technology and the AI and all that. I have to agree with you that it's helpful as a sort of like underlying, like, make sure that I'm getting relevant information that has to do with potentially where I want to go, but let me make choice, I think is a really important piece to this, because how are we going to know, AI is getting fantastic, but how would we know where someone's passions lie? What is the best way that they learn? What might be interesting to them, because it changes so frequently. What I might want to do today might not be, what I'm interested in learning a year from now.
Indeed.
Yeah, no, completely. Thank you so much. And thank you so much for joining us today. For anyone that would like to keep tabs on Sebastien's work, I highly suggest you follow him on LinkedIn and Twitter. And I believe that's at STURBO on Twitter and Sebastien Turbot on LinkedIn. And you can also
STURBOT.
Oh, is it? Okay, I forgot a T there. My apologies. Thank you.
It's a silent T, but it is a T.
Thank you. And then Echo 6 is available at EKO6 Communities on Twitter. So definitely take a quick peek. I will make sure to share anything that we've chatted about today, and especially with your work with WISE, of course, you can follow them on social media as well. And thank you all for listening in to Let's Talk About Skills Baby today. We are available on iTunes, Spotify, YouTube, and of course, all of the socials under the podcast name or me, Kelly Ryan Bailey. Thank you all, and I hope you have a wonderful day.
Thank you.